Welcome. My name is William Messakar. I am a master model railroader in the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. I want to welcome all of you to the virtual layout tour we'll have presented today by members of the NMRA. We would encourage you to find out about the NMRA and join in order to participate in these virtual tours. We have other virtual clinics and other activities for the National Model Railroad Association that we think you'll find a big help to your modeling, and you'll get to meet model railroaders just like you. So welcome to our tour, and I hope you enjoy it.
We'll start with our first layout tour, which is Brian Ferris from Olympia, Washington.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm going to talk about my layout, the Port Townsend Southern. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I wanted to start with a little background. When I was preparing for this, I realized that I've been modeling for over 50 years, which is kind of scary to think about. A lot has changed over that time. My story started, like many of you all and others that you read about, starting with Lionel trains many years ago. But I have a little bit of a twist to that story because I've never owned any Lionel trains. My cousins, who were about 10 years older than us, had quite an extensive Lionel collection, but they lived in a house that didn't have any room for a layout. So they set up their trains in our house. And as they got a little older and started getting distracted by things like cars and girls and things like that, my brother and I got the opportunity to play with those Lionel trains. So that's what hooked us. Eventually, we got rid of the Lionels, and my older cousin, took him back, and he has an extensive Lionel layout now, and actually lives in Olympia here and is just Lionel crazy. But we ended up going into HO, and this is one of my earliest layouts. So this is a little bit of an incriminating photo. Myself and my brother, Dean, who currently works for the BNSF, and this is how we kind of started. He's gotten the bug more than I have. He actually works for BNSF now, many years later, down in Fort Worth, and has an excellent N-scale layout called the Oregon Joint Line, which maybe some of you have seen some of his videos on YouTube. They're really, really good. I'd recommend that. So I enjoy doing a lot of research for railroad history, especially in the Northwest, probably to the chagrin of some of my friends as we drive around and I bore them with all kinds of trivia about rail lines that were or used to be in operation and how it worked before. So they usually roll their eyes and as we drive around and I point out these sites. But one of the things that's really sparked my interest in this hobby has been operations. So I've been pretty much focused on that for the last about 15 years. And so I wanted to build a layout that would focus on operations. So my layout currently is the Port Townsend Southern. And to steal from Greg Price, here's the layout at a glance. He did that a couple weeks ago on his tour, so that you can see the specifics of it. It's HO, about 26 by 15.5. Plus, I punched a hole in the wall into the adjacent garage. It's a proto-freelance theme that's in southern Thurston County, and the era is around 1959 or 60. I've not been super disciplined about staying in a specific year, so that's generally the year, but I do have equipment that is newer and some older stuff on there too as well. I run both steam and diesel. It's a point-to-point layout. I do have a continuous running option so that I can, for open houses or the like, I can have trains continually run. This layout was begun in 2008, and so we're well into it. So when I designed the layout, I actually had the opportunity to design the room that it went into, and I was able to do some things that I really wanted to do based on lessons learned from previous layouts. So here's kind of my list. The room has minimal doors and windows, which is always nice. And I got to control some of the electrical circuitry that went into the room. I wanted to have a layout that was mainline with single track with sidings for having meats and operations, and it was focused on the Northwest with lumber products. I grew up down in the Grace Harbor area and got to see as a child the NP, GN, or the NP, the UP, and the Milwaukee almost on a daily basis. So that's kind of what my focus has been. My family was heavily involved with mill and the woods. My grandfather actually worked for the Polson lumber or Polson logging company and actually worked on the Polson logging line back in the 1920s. I wanted to have passenger and freight and locals with switching, a fairly good sized yard. And one of the things I wanted to make sure I had was a separate drill track so that if somebody is working in the yard, they're not fouling the main line. I wanted to have a dedicated industrial area. And one of the things I try to do with my design is have separate work areas so trains or train crews could go and work in a certain area for a period of time and kind of be by themselves and not be interfered with. And then when they're done with their work, come back to the yard and deliver their local or whatever. And that's worked okay. It's not, we still have jam ups with trains on the line and people, but that kind of makes it fun during operations. I already mentioned that I have continuous running. I wanted to have a staging yard that was not hidden. I'm not a big fan of helix. And again, I wanted to do some prototypical operations, and I didn't really know what that meant when I started this layout, but I wanted to dabble with timetable and train order and switch lists. So I've learned a lot over the years in implementing these methodologies. So Port Townsend Southern. So this is the picture of the real Port Townsend Southern, a pretty rickety looking train heading out of Port Townsend about the turn of the century with one car. The original line actually ran from Port Townsend to Quilcene. And that was what was established originally. My layout has no Port Townsend on it. In fact, most people probably are very puzzled when they see the towns on my layout because it doesn't include any of that area. But the Port Townsend Southern actually had a southern division. And this was a line that was built originally by the Olympia and Tenino Railroad, which is a community-based operation that connected the NP main line at Tenino with the Olympia area when the NP thumbed their nose at the state capitol and bypassed Olympia completely when they originally built. Port Townsend Southern bought it around 1900. And I think that their intention was to connect that southern line with the line up in the Port Townsend Quilcene area. That never happened. And the Port Townsend southern portion was eventually swallowed up by the NP. I found some surveys of a line through southern Thurston County that the Port Townsend Southern did in the early 1900s. And it turns out that that's where the NP actually built their double track main line in about 1911. So they basically swallowed up the Port Townsend Southern and their intellectual property of the survey and built the line that's currently used to this day by BNSF and Amtrak and UP. So my version is a proto-freelance around 1960 that the company still survived, but they're pretty much non-existent and owned by the tenant railroads. Here is the actual line. You can see the blue arrow. This was the original Port Townsend Southern line that ran from Tenino up to Olympia. This was before the main line was built in southern Thurston County. This is the original NP line that was built from Portland to Seattle. And this is the way that it ended up. So this is the double track main line that the Northern Pacific built in about 1911, opened in 1915, 16. And that was on the survey that the Port Townsend Southern had originally done. This line from Tenino up to Plum was the original Port Townsend Southern. And this is pretty much what I'm modeling. So the southern end is Centralia. Down here at the bottom is my staging. I do have a Blakesley Junction where the Milwaukee comes on. It's not exactly geographically correct on my line. I have a Wabash. I don't do Bakota or Tenino. I do have the Milwaukee coming on at Western Junction here, and they have trackage rights basically through the southern part of the line. Plum is on my layout, and then Chambers Prairie is the midpoint of the layout where the major yard is. The way that it works is it's kind of a hub and spoke operation where through trains drop off traffic and pick up traffic in Chambers Prairie, and then locals are dispatched from Chambers Prairie out to various mills and whatnot. Going north, Cairo is the next location that I model. St. Clair, and I have a branch that comes off of St. Clair to Union Mill here, just a short branch, and then north on up to Tacoma, which is the upper staging. So Chambers Prairie is kind of loosely modeled after how Centralia actually worked on the real NP, whereas in the middle of the Seattle-Portland line, and trains dropped off and picked up there, and then locals were dispatched from that. Here's a schematic of the layout. As I mentioned here, Centralia, Blakesley Junction, the Milwaukee comes on there. They have a branch that goes to Maytown for points south. And then they have trackage rights up through Wabash and Plum, and then they peel off at Western Junction, go on to Frederickson. Here's Chambers Prairie, which is the main yard. There's a little industrial area out to Belmore, Cairo, St. Clair with the branch to Union Mills, and then Tacoma is the upper staging. There's a schematic of the room, kind of hard to see, but this is the garage area out here. The staging yard is Tacoma for the upper and Centralia for the lower. You come through the wall here on the upper to St. Clair and go around through Cairo and down through this area. And then this is the major yard area, which is Chambers Prairie. If you're on the main line, you're peeling around this curve, coming down the hill and underneath the yard to Western Junction where the Milwaukee comes on. And then this is the Plum area, which tends to get really jammed up during operation sessions. We call it the Plum pileup. Usually we have at least one meltdown down there. Down through Wabash, and then out through the wall into Centralia, the lower staging. Here's the simulated branch out in the garage to Maytown that the Milwaukee goes out and switches. And this is a simulated branch from St. Clair that comes to Union Mills. This track here is the connection, which allows me to do basically a loop-to-loop continuous running that has come in very handy for open houses that we've had. You notice that the room is pretty wide open in the middle. Originally, I was going to build a big peninsula out here and pretty much take up this room, but as time has gone on, I've come to like this area because it's pretty roomy and people can get in and do operations, and I can accommodate layout tours pretty well. So I've decided to scale back my peninsula, and this is what it's going to end up being. And this is what I've been working on lately. This is my pandemic peninsula that I've been working on for the last few months. Uh-oh. What happened? Also, there's a short staging yard here that is under the yard, and that's where the Milwaukee comes on to the layout. Here's a room overview. It shows you kind of what it looks like during an operations session. You might see a few people you recognize here. Robin Peel was in this, and Steve Cox in the background there. I think that's Bill Sandstrom, Jordan Dobson, Bill Busaka, and Tyler Whitcomb over here. This was actually a year ago at Oleops. And if you swing the camera over to the left, this is the other section of the layout. This is the branch going down to Union Mills with a train heading down there. Staging yards, these are my staging yards out in the garage. The top is Tacoma, the bottom is Centralia, and you can see the mouse holes through the wall that go into the layout room. Each of them have 5 tracks. Another photo of the upper staging showing some trains that have completed their run. There's Maytown. That's over on the other wall of the garage. This is where the Milwaukee goes out and switches. This is a pretty fun job for folks. I've seen people go out there and spend quite a bit of time, and it's kind of a switching puzzle, but I think they enjoy it. There's another view of Maytown. Some of these photos, and I've got credit for each of them, were taken by the Trackside Model Railroad group that came and did a photo shoot about 3 or 4 years ago. So some of these are from that. So you can see the staging back in the wall of the garage over here on the left. So I'm going to just do a few scenes just to kind of give you a flavor for how the layout looks. This is, again, where the two lines come in from the staging. The bottom one is coming in from Centralia, the top one from Tacoma. And the top line, this is St. Clair with the branch peeling off to Union Mills. And then the bottom, this is the Wabash area. Here's a photo of the same area, and it's during an operation session. And you can see that we've got quite a bit going on here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 trains active. We've got a passenger train coming in on the lower line, and they're meeting a freight that's sitting in the hole. And then the Milwaukee train is in here switching. And then there's a train up here on the upper level coming out of Union Mills. And I noticed that there's actually a flagman out here protecting that train so they can come out and foul the main. Here's another photo of passenger train coming through the Wabash area, kind of showing you some of the scenery and stuff. At Wabash, there's also a coal mine operation. So somebody during an operation session gets the coal job, they get to go switch this coal mine, swapping loads for empties. Okay, moving up the line a little bit. This is a lower section of Wabash, train coming into the siding there. And on the upper line, you can see a NP passenger train going through the scene. Kind of the same place, but from a different angle. There's the NP train that you just saw. This line here that crosses the main line, this is the Mudbay Southern, which some of you may be familiar with Jim Yonkins. This is a little bit bigger size of the Mudbay Southern, but there's a track crew out there working on their line, which is all of about 1 foot long. Another view of the same area there in Cairo with the NP passenger train number 408 moving through the scene. Okay, moving along here, this is a Milwaukee train heading into Western Junction. This is where they come on and off of the layout for trackage rights. We usually have 1 Milwaukee train come through per operation session. If it's a long session, we may have 2. The upper section in the background you see is Belmore, which there's a dedicated switch job that goes and works that. Here's another view of the Belmore industrial area with the switch job working in there. This is a pretty fun job. I think the people that draw this enjoy it. You have a number of cars to deliver and pick up, and you have to work with the yard master to deliver those cars in and pull cars out. Seems like the people that do it tend to enjoy it. Okay, here's a view of the whole yard. And so this gives you an idea of the size of the yard and some of the engine facility there. This is, again, Chambers Prairie. Usually when we have an operation session, we'll have a yard master who's in charge of sorting the yard and figuring out where it goes where, and then a helper or a hogger that runs the yard engine. Here's a photo of the engine facility and the turntable there at Chambers Prairie. You can see I run a mix of power, so I have too many darn engines that I got to use. Okay, here's swinging over in a view at Union Mills. This is a lumber mill there, and then there's a log dump there. So usually we run a train down to pick up the lumber and deliver empties, and then a second train that delivers the log train and picks up the empties there. Another view of the logger working the log dump there at Union Mills. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about operations. As I mentioned, that I've really focused most of my building on operations, and my goal is to try to get a feel for how to replicate how the railroads ran back in the 50s and 60s. And nothing happens super fast. And one of the focuses I've tried to do is get people to slow down a little bit. And I think that's hard for folks when they first come in because they're really nervous and they want to get a job and they want to do it very efficiently. I tend to have a lot of paperwork and a lot of working together with others. And so my goal is to try to get folks to slow down and enjoy it a little bit. And I think once people understand that and use the time to plan out their moves, I think they enjoy it a lot more. When people first come in and they expect to do things very snappy, or they think they're expected to do that, I think that puts a lot of pressure on folks. And I really try to emphasize taking your time and kind of having a good time. It's a little tedious for those of you that have operated in my layout, because I have a lot of paperwork. I use switch lists that you have to make out. I used to also use timetable and train order, but I feel like, again, this will slow things down, because if you actually ran from one end of my layout to the other, it would take you about 8 minutes and you would be done. Whereas I want most jobs to last, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour or more, so that we can enjoy a 3-hour operating session rather than a 20-minute operation session. Here's an example of the lineup I use. Now, this was for a full day operations. This was actually what I was going to use for Sound Rail last March before we ended up having to cancel. So this is actually a session that would have been from 10 a.m. until 4 in the afternoon. A lot of the train numbers that you see, the through trains, are ones that actually ran on the Seattle to Portland line back in the 50s and 60s. I've done a lot of research to determine the numbers. For instance, the NP hotshot freight that ran during that time was number 680. And the pool passenger trains that ran, the GN ran their number 459 and 460. So the locals I've totally made up. They're just for my own themes of how I've done it. But the through trains are actually somewhat true to what was running in that era. So this gives an idea of what we would try to run for operations session. Now, if we were doing a 3-hour session, it would be about half of this. So this is pretty aggressive for a full day, which never happened because of we ended up canceling. If you get a train, you'll be handed some paperwork that tells you a lot of information. This one is the Milwaukee Road Switch. It tells you it runs from Frederickson to Maytown and return with work at Wabash. It tells you your engine number, tells you what your DCC number. If this train was going into staging, it would tell you what track you start, what track you end, and how many cars you can handle. This one doesn't happen to go to staging. It shows you that you have 8 cars in your consist and where you're going to be setting them out. And then it shows you the cars that you're going to be picking up en route. And it shows you where to pick them up and where they're destined. So that's kind of a train listing for the operator. And then on the back, I've tried to put step-by-step instructions on what they're supposed to do. Most people end up don't even reading this, but I'd like to think that they would and follow this step by step. And then it shows you a map of the layout so that you can hopefully try to keep track of where you are. Okay, if you're in the yard, you make up switch lists. And this is an example of that. The yard master would have a master list, and he would then go through a line and write down the cars and where they're going and what track number. And then as they're drilled, you would cross that off. Again, a little tedious, but that's really kind of how the real railroads operated. Yard master would be handing out switch lists to the crews, and they would go out and drill the cars accordingly. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about timetable and train order, which is a real scary thing to a lot of folks. But I've, again, started out wanting to do this, and I've learned a lot over the years. There's a lot to it, but I feel like it's a lot of fun. And the idea is, this is some prototype paperwork. You have a timetable that has trains on it, and they're by class. So you have first class, second class, third class, etc. And the way that this works is that it shows you the superiority of each train. So first class trains are superior to second class are superior to third class, etc. And then we run extras. And if you have an extra, you're the bottom of the heap. And the idea is that if you have a train that is first class, you're kind of king of the hill and everybody has to get out of your way. Second class trains have to, they're inferior to first class, so they have to get out of the way of the first class. And if you're extra, you're chopped liver and you got to get out of the way of everybody. So it leaves some of the decision making to the crew to be able to figure out how they're going to traverse over the layout. And then in addition, you can have orders that would either augment the timetable or give you special instructions on how to run. So we've used this. It's, again, tedious, but I think it gives you a real good view of how the railroads really ran for nearly 150 years. And we've had a lot of fun and learned a lot over the years. And I think I'd like to say we're getting better and better. I think I learn something every time we do it. So here's an example of my timetable that I use. And here's an example of an order that would replicate the Form 19s, giving it extra authorization to run. And then we use clearance cards as well, that every train that gets out on the main line has to have a clearance form. So again, the idea is to kind of use this as a learning tool for folks. And you know, I think that people have learned a lot and it's a little intimidating, but usually we try to match up new operators with experienced ones. And I'd like to think that folks have a good time. And really, what's the worst thing that could happen? Because there's no risk of life or limb on this. Just some good-natured ribbing if you forget something. So here's an example of how we work that. This is the dispatcher, who is the late Doug Walters, who was a regular dispatcher on my layout. And he's dictating orders to Larry Altbaum, who's from California here on a sound rail. And then he would deliver those orders to the train crews. And I have train order signals at the station. So if you see a train order signal down, then you know you need to get orders. Here's another example, more recent one. This is David Holden, who has been dispatching the layout in the last couple of years, and he's got his train sheet. And we've used in the past phone systems to talk between the dispatcher and the operator. And here is Olin Dirks on a sound rail. He's from Omaha. He was the operator on that session. So I'm going to show a few photos of happy operators. I didn't get any of sad or angry operators. I'm sure there has been some, but I only have photos of the happy operators. So here is Jim O'Neill, a Spokane area modeler, running the yard. This is what Burr was talking about earlier. I think he got to run the yard a couple of years back. Here's a couple guys. I think Rich Tom might even be on the phone. Rich and Jack Tingstad from Whidbey, they're running the Union Mills job over there. And a lot of times in the locals, we'll run two-person crews. So when one person as the engine man and the other is the conductor giving directions on what to switch where. And this can be quite a switching puzzle over here. But as you can see, they're just happy as can be. Another couple happy operators. This is Jim Taylor and Carl Soner running the Plum local. And again, another tedious switching job, but they appear to be having a great time. Here's a year ago at Oleops, we got Bill Sandstrom and Michael Stepner, and they appear to be having a good time, but I wanted to point out that they are kind of sheepishly smiling because their two trains are very close to having a head-on collision in the background here. But they stopped in time, and there was no catastrophe, and actually that is within rules because they're both in yard limits, but we gave them a bad time about that as well. And here's Gary Jordan running the Milwaukee job out in the garage a few years back, and you can see that's quite a switching puzzle out there. But he, again, another happy operator. So I wanted to just wrap things up today about giving just a plug to our Olympia group. So we've got some. Olympia seems to be a real mecca for model railroads. We've got about 10 really good layouts down here and more modelers than that, but within a very tight geographic location, and we've had a pretty active group. And some of those folks you may know, like Greg Wright, Ryan Bates, Jim Yonkins has an excellent N-scale layout, Scott Buckley, Chuck Ricketts, I think he's on the call today, and Jim Elder as well, and Clint Brown, and there's others. But one of the things that has been a kind of an ongoing thing is that certain things tend to just show up on layouts. So a few years back, Greg Wright went to the effort of creating an Olympia beer car for each of us in various scales. This one in HO, he did one for N scale for Jim and ON30 for Chuck. And those things mysteriously appeared on our layouts. But it's been a lot of fun. And I'd like to think that I'm a fairly observant person, but I've discovered over the years that I am not. And so some of these things that have just mysteriously appeared on my layout can take me quite a while to actually find. You can see this Port Townsend Southern truck back here was something that just mysteriously appeared on the layout with a logo conveniently created even. There's been buildings and people and ambulances and all kinds of things that have mysteriously appeared. In fact, we have a joke where you have to shake people down at the door to see what they have in their pockets because you never know what's going to end up on the layout. But it's been a lot of fun, and I've been kind of the receiver of a lot of these jokes because there was this caboose that was actually put on my layout, and I hate to admit this, but I did not find it for about 6 weeks. So that was really sad. Greg had to call me and tell me to go look in the roundhouse, and lo and behold, I found this beautiful caboose in there. So that was pretty, I hate to admit that, but that was pretty bad. So that's the end. And I guess, Burr, I don't know, I could stop my sharing here, and I was going to just hold my computer up and kind of take on a real-time virtual tour here, if I can get it situated. So I'm in the layout room, and you can kind of see the room in my head. There's my Pandemic Peninsula I'm working on over there, and the yard area. And then over in the corner is the Union Mills. That gives you just a quick, brief view of the layout with my shaky hands. Sorry about that. So Burr, I don't know if we open it up for questions or what.
We do. Does anyone have any questions? I had one, which is, you mentioned SoundRails was canceled in March. Have you ever run 6-hour op sessions?
Yeah, we for SoundRails, those are all day.
Yeah.
So we usually do a 3-hour in the morning, take a lunch break, and a 3-hour in the afternoon. That was very challenging for me to do the first couple times, but I've got enough equipment and enough trains now to pull that off. And then I wanted to let you know also that we have done an annual event, Oli Ops, which we are unfortunately having to cancel this year. And that's usually a full day of operations down in the Olympia area. You get a morning session with one layout, and then you take a lunch, and then you go to a second layout in the afternoon. And I've participated in that every year except for 1 year. I believe we've had it for 13 years straight. Unfortunately, it's usually in October. We're canceling this year because of the current situation. So we've also hosted open houses, which have been a lot of fun over the years. And one of those, a few years back, I had over 90 visitors come through.
Any other questions from the group?
Oh, David Holden says dispatchers get kind of punchy after a couple hours of operations. Yeah, he should know.
Burr, this is Bill Messicar. Brian, tell us a little bit about your signal system. How does it work?
Oh, it's pretty low tech. It's actually just signals hooked up to tortoises for showing the route. So that's all it is.
Okay, thanks.
One other detail about the signaling. You mentioned you had train order signals. Are those controlled by the operator or the dispatcher?
The train order signals, I have one that's electronically operated by the operator. The other I have two other ones that are actually, I'll show you how they're operated. The operator picks them up and moves them, and then puts them back down on a magnet.
Great.
So it's very low tech.
Excellent.
I
Excellent.
would like to get these hooked up to electronics as well, but for right now, that's how they're operated. They're actually manually operated.
Great.
How long did it take you to build the layout? I'm Joel Scott.
Hi, Joel. I started in 2008. Had my first op session, I think, a year later, but it was kind of Plywood Pacific at that point. So, you know, just progress ever since.
Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun. And I really appreciate the community of model railroaders, especially in the Puget Sound area, getting to know a lot of you guys. And I look forward to the day when I can have you all come over and operate or come for a layout tour.
Well, we'd love to.
This is Alex Brickoff.
Hi, Alex.
I was just curious, when on a typical operating session, how many guys do you have per crew?
The sweet spot is about 9. I've had as many as like 12 or 13. That gets a little, we're kind of tripping over each other at that point. So around 9 is about right. And the layout does accommodate that size of group because it is pretty open. So I don't have any super narrow aisleways or anything like that. But interestingly enough, people still tend to congregate at the yard. And I'll come in during an op session and 6 of the 9 people will be within about a 5-foot square place because they're all vying for the same track space. So it's kind of funny the way it works.
Thanks, Brian.
Do you use 2-man crews or 1-man crews, or does it depend on the size of the total group?
It depends on the size, but for the most part, the locals really should have a 2-person crew. The through trains can if they have some work, but for the most part, a single operator can handle those. So I usually have single operators doing the through trains and a crew of 2 doing the locals, and then a 2-person crew in the yard.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. That was an excellent tour.
Hello again. This is another reminder that this virtual layout tour has been brought to you by members of the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. And we hope you've enjoyed it. And we want to encourage you to, again, find out about the NMRA online. Both PNR and NMRA have an excellent website where you can get information about joining and participating in this and other activities like our clinics that are held all over the region. So thank you for joining us today and wish you great modeling.